All
in
right,
real
we
life.
are live. I am Alexander McCrease, Archon, here with Tom Kratman. We are on ACKS II Grind. Tom, thanks for joining tonight.
Glad to be here.
All right. So, ACKS fans, Tom and I have known each other now over a decade. He and I worked together when I ran a men's website called Every Joe. He was one of our columnists. He wrote Line of Departure uh, for about military affairs for everyjoe.com, but that is really, of course, probably the least impressive thing he's done in his life. Many more interesting accomplishments, including um, uh, long career in the U.S. military, the U.S. Army, of course, author of many books with Bain Books as your publisher, and you have a new book coming out.
I do. I
Cool.
sent you a picture of it, I think.
Yeah, I tried to use it as the thumbnail, but the image wasn't high res enough, so I had the AI make something
Okay.
based on it. I used
Okay.
your picture in the thumbnail though.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
In all my, at the moment, at that time, bearded glory. That was 2 or 3, 4 years ago, I think.
You looked like some sort of Spartan king of old. I really dug it. Like I felt like at any moment you were going to call on me to defend the hot gates, and I was kind of fired up about it.
Well, like a Spartan or a Russian, it's really hard to say.
Cut from the
I'm
same
about this
cloth.
much Russian, so.
What is it? What is your ethnicity? Actually, I'm curious.
Oh, overwhelmingly Irish, about 70% or so, something like that. And then there's a certain admixture of 8% worth of Welsh, Scottish, and English, which
Yeah.
suggests to me that at least 8 of my multi great grandmothers were raped by British soldiery at one time or another. And then the remaining roughly quarter is Ashkenazi Jew, um, from Germany, Poland, Hungary, over into Russia, and how much of each I really can't say.
Gotcha. I did. You got those ice blue eyes, right? So it's clearly some sort of Northern
Irish.
European. Yeah. I did
My
23andMe,
mother
and
was.
your mother, pure Irish.
My, oh, she was pure. Yeah,
Pure. Yeah.
but except for those aforementioned multi great grandmothers, but
Right.
otherwise
Right.
she was
Right.
pure.
Right. 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 Yeah, I did 23andMe, and I got Sicilian, Ionian Island, and Transylvanian was my lineup there. So,
Name's Greek though, right?
yeah, Greek. Yeah.
Of course, Sicily is about half Greek genetically, so.
Sicily is half Greek, and then the Ionian Islands were actually a part of Greece that never got occupied by the Turks, so we don't have any of the evil Turk blood in us.
Are you talking like Corcyra and
Uh,
Ithaca and that sort of thing?
yeah, Paxus, Antipaxus, Mykonos, that whole chain of islands to the west. And then our family ended up in Transylvania after, well, it was kind of a long story, but we were evil white male oppressors and were oppressing the peasantry, and so they overthrew us, as you do. So. Hey, all right. So speaking of oppressing the peasants, tell us about your new book, Romanov Rising, and the prequel.
Okay, I've got to tell you about the prequel first.
Got to tell us about the prequel first. Okay.
There's a guy named Max Hoffman. He was a German staff officer in World War One.
Okay.
Max was probably the greatest staff officer who ever lived.
Hmm.
As a
Okay.
two-star, he was in effect commanding. We wouldn't have said that, but he was really commanding the German army in the East in World War One, the Bulgarian army, and the Austro-Hungarian army.
Wow. Okay.
He told them all what to do. I mentioned the dog might come in. She's here.
Hello.
Um, so we've got him. He takes a different turn on his nightly walk through Brest-Litovsk in the course of the peace negotiations between the Central Powers and the Russian Empire. And in the course of his changed course, he comes upon, I think it's 5 Bolsheviks about to rape a young girl. So he and his aide Brinkman kill them, tell the girl to go on their way, but mention nothing to anyone of what happened. And then he starts thinking, I've got to get rid of the Bolsheviks. Well, and this is true. The Germans are still holding plenty of Russian POWs.
Right.
They are holding the worst escape artists in Ingolstadt 9, I think it was. I wrote the book about 4 or 5 years ago.
Of course, of course.
So I don't really remember. But Ingolstadt 9. Interestingly, Charles de Gaulle and Mikhail Tukhachevsky were both in the same place.
Oh, wow.
So I created a only somewhat fictive friend of mine, West Point 1980. I'm not West Point, by the way, guys, who died of cancer around 12 years ago. And I just resurrected him because I didn't want him to be dead. And I made him, instead of Dan Kostashak, I made him Dan Kostashakov so that I could make him royalty, so I could put him in a guards regiment. And Hoffman recruits Dan to raise a force, which he will arrange for transport to somewhere in Russia, if they can find where the royal family, imperial family is. And Dan is to rescue them. Now, another true thing is there's a Zeppelin, the Africa ship, that was supposed to resupply von Lido Forbeck's troops in Africa. But they had to turn back at the last minute. Well, that ended up in Max's bailiwick in Bulgaria. So he has a method of getting them there. And then the story is a lot of training, really, and a lot of looking with a small team is looking for where the royal family is, and they have to fight pirates, and they rescue a minor nobility girl who's been sold as a sex slave, and kill some robbers trying to take a train. And they do find out where it is, and they get the word back by wiring to an office in Sweden that reports directly to Max. They do the rescue. The rescue is only somewhat effective in the sense that of the royal family, the Tsar, the Tsarina, the oldest sister Olga are killed.
Oh, no.
And the youngest brother throws himself, the little boy throws himself on a grenade to save his sisters. And he was a hemophiliac anyway, so, you know.
Right.
He was somewhat of a liability, so he had to go. In the sequel, the Romanov Rising, it's a continuation of the Civil War with the oldest of the sisters who lived, Tatiana, who was a fairly stout character, really. Her brother and sisters called her the governess, because even if she wasn't the oldest, she was always in charge.
Right.
And would make them do what they had to do. So she's a Tsarina now. And it's a couple of things going on. Defending Tobolsk, which is the temporary imperial capital. It's in Siberia. Really cut off. No rail line or anything. And only a water linkage for a few months out of the year, 4 or 5 months. There's a rescue of her Aunt Ella, also known as Elizabeth of Hessen by Rhine, who was really a babe of the ocean-going class when she was young. And there's grabbing Yekaterinburg, which is a major industrial city with all kinds of precious metal in it. And then there's a love story of, well, Tatiana sends her two younger sisters, Maria and Anastasia, on the Trans-Siberian Railway to go through Japan, to go to San Francisco, to cross the United States, to go to New York, and there wait for transportation that's safe when the war is over, to go to England. Well, Maria turns out to be kind of a bitch, but Anastasia falls in love with the United States. You know, she just loves everything about us, and finally links up with one of the Roosevelt boys, Quentin, who, if you look, was actually KIA in the First World War. Why didn't we kill him? We didn't kill him because that Zeppelin that carried the rescue force, Max got 2 fighters to escort it across lines. And the pilots of those 2 fighters were 2 of the 3 people that jumped Quentin in 1918.
Oh,
so we
wow.
saved him. And, you know, I think it's a pretty fun story so far. It's going to be a lot of volumes. I will not live long enough to finish it. But Justin and Casey, my co-authors, are both young enough that they can. I'm going to do a couple of them, a couple of subsequent volumes in the higher numbers, like the Defense of the Philippines.
So is the idea that the communist takeover of this, the Bolshevik takeover of the Soviet Union was really the turning point for 20th century, and you're kind of like going back in time to say this is what the 20th century might have been like if that hadn't happened?
Yeah, that's another story. One of the writer chicks for the first volume was Mona Lisa Foster. She's a refugee from communist Romania. Good-looking girl, very bright too.
Yes, that's the one
that's
the one I'm Facebook friends with that you introduced me to. Okay.
And she kind of decided that this just wasn't her thing, alternate history, because I'm a real dick. You know, no, that's not good enough. It has to, you know, go
right.
Look here. But damn it, what was your question? I'm getting old.
I was asking sort of, is the idea that the communist revolution was the turning point for 20th century history?
That's Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa wanted to do a story using it, totally unrelated, really, using the night witches, a Soviet female light bomber
pilots.
Yeah. In World War II, but she didn't want to make any communists the good guys. So she asked me how to do that, and I thought about it, and I said, well, you got to save the Romanovs.
Right.
And that's kind of how the whole thing kicked off. Coupled into that was something that's going to be one subsequent volume that I'll do is the defense of the Philippines. And we have a couple of tricks for that. Another one is Seeadler, which is the German invasion of England in 1940, which I think I told you about once down in Wake Forest, and I told your friend Sean. Was it?
Sean Falcone, yeah.
Yeah, and you could see him getting, you know, misty-eyed and a hard dick at the time, being in on that desperate an invasion. So that was really Mona Lisa's idea, and Seeadler kind of linked.
Got it.
Okay, I have an excuse now for why the Germans must invade England in 1940. And yeah, I've researched it a lot. It's going to be tough, but it's doable.
That's interesting. Okay, so you expect to get through those parts, but then afterwards the series will continue on. I mean, that's kind of
I'm going to be dotty or I'm going to be dead, but you know, before I can finish it. 19 volumes, you know, that's a lot.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of volumes. Yeah. I mean, well, look, you know, you could do the George R. Martin thing and take 14 years to do one volume.
No, I'm not capable of
that. So
I get bored.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that he did too. That's the problem.
He got bored with the story. I get bored with the lack of progress.
Right.
That's a little bit different.
No, that's true. That's different. Yeah. Speaking of which, so Sean Falcone is actually in another video series that I do called The Grey Brotherhood. I pulled together all of my old War Games buddies from West Point, and we play role-playing games and record them. And so most of the audience here knows Sean. He's Castinus in The Grey Brotherhood. So he's on air with me.
A lot of military talent got wasted when he got out. I think he's.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's great. I mean, you know, I think all of those guys would tell you that the U.S. Army was kind of designed to repel people like them at this point. So, you know.
Yeah. So anyway, it will be fun, and I'll get as much done as I can before I'm dead. Who knows? There's a theory I'm too mean to die.
Yeah, I've heard that actually. Yeah, I believe that. So Jonathan is actually here with us. So Jonathan is another one of our Grey Brotherhood members. He and Sean and I were all classmates. Jonathan says true. So yeah, definitely true. Jonathan was in the armor rather than the infantry, but Sean is still friends with him.
That's okay. That's right. My theory on where is infantry? Infantry is wherever moral and intellectual factors take precedence over merely technical and technological ones. And that includes armor, it includes combat engineers, it includes air defense, it includes short-range air defense artillery, and it can sometimes include artillery.
Right. So you're saying like the spirit of infantry, in other words.
Yeah, except that the problem with armor is they're a bit infected by cavalry. But all the cavalry is in the air now. It's the only place where there's a speed of maneuver differential that allows them to do cavalry missions. Armored cav, no. Air cav, yes. And in the Air Force.
So you would say armor
So,
is no longer cavalry, and so air cavalry is the real cavalry. That's interesting. Yeah.
It's my theory, and I'm happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure Jonathan would like to argue with you about that. Maybe I should have you guys both come on air at some point and you can fight it out. But so this
You either agree
question.
with me or you don't, but
Yeah, I know, but it's for the entertainment of the audience to hear the arguments.
Oh well, okay, in that case.
Yeah. So raised an interesting point, which is we talked about this a little bit before we went live. A lot of the audience here is gamers, play a lot of war games. Wanted to ask you, so like from your perspective, as someone who saw combat, as someone who was in the military for a while, it might be worth actually sharing your background a little bit. Where do war games and role-playing games go wrong when they do simulation? Like, where are they going wrong?
War games. I don't do role-playing games. I'm not competent to speak of them.
Sure.
It's not so much wrong as in error. When you're talking about a game, it's non-realistic, but it's not wrong, morally wrong. It's just an error.
Right. Okay, I see. Yes, sure.
Excessive control. Jesus, I could wax lyrical about how the army is fucked up about war games.
Wax. That's what we're here for. We're here to be lyrical. Yeah.
Panama used to have what was command post war game, they called it. It was written by a lieutenant named Timmons, I think, and it was at the time the single most complex non-computerized war game in the world. And we played it like twice a year, and it had rules for everything, and maximum feasible admin play and maximum feasible logistics play, and it was all real time. And you know what? When you do real time, there is not enough action to drive any substantial amount of administrative or logistics play. So it all slows down to the point where what the game is trying to do, it cannot do. And the answer to that is faster than real time. It also, virtually every war game going, I think, except maybe the way of life games like Drang nach Osten from the old SPI and such like. They're too slow, and it takes too long to play. People don't buy them to play; they buy them to study.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of games. Yeah,
which is fine as far as it goes, and a lot of research goes into some of those games, and they're worth studying. But they're not war games; they're just study guides.
I see.
So I designed a game. You asked me about that too. And I learned something about the General Officer Corps. I actually didn't learn it till a few years ago, where it really finally hit me. I called the game Against Fire, a riff off S.L.A. Marshall's Men Against Fire. And it was pretty good. Basically, it's highly simplified squad leader rules.
Okay, yeah.
But at a time where it took virtually an act of Congress to get, what did we call it? Task C, we called it back then, I think. Training Aid Services Center, to do color printing. I got them to do color printing, and I got their woodworking shop to shut down for about 3 weeks to make me these pigeonhole things, 5 of them per game. And down one side was the type of munition, and along the top was the person in the squad. And, there was enough for a platoon, and then 2 squads on the other side, up to 2 squads on the other side. And what you did was you put chits in the little pigeonhole blocks, and the opposing player could look at it on demand anytime and say, "Oh, you guys carrying too much. I'm going to take this," and throw it away, to drive some logistics play that was actually pretty quick and easy. My problem was I put in a morale check. So battalion commander set up a briefing for the CG down in Panama, Fat Fred Warner. It's not a bad guy, it really wasn't. And Warner's he's just thrilled. And then I get to morale check, and he looks at me because he knows what it is, but he wants to make sure he heard right. He says, Morale check. Yes, sir. When the troops don't do what you want them to do, when you roll a dice, and sometimes when get me my helicopter. I just remembered I have to be somewhere else. And he was gone so fast. I had no
Oh,
idea what the hell was
wow.
going on. And what it was, I'm sure he could picture himself sitting in front of some congressional committee and some grandstanding piece of shit of a congressman lecturing him. And let me let you know, General, that the fine men and women of my district who send their sons and daughters to serve in the military are not sending us cowards who will, run away or. So.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense.
I've still got one or two copies in my garage.
Right. So I went a couple years back. It was just before COVID to the Army War College. I got invited to go talk to them about using AI, or rather about simulating the use of AI in war. And so they basically wanted to say, if you had an AI superintelligence, how would it change warfare? And I got to spend some time with the guys that were running like the war games at the War College, and he basically explained something similar to what you were saying, which is that essentially the guys that made us a general officer had no real interest in learning war games, nor did they have any particular interest in being told, that their troops wouldn't do something they said they would do, nor did they ever want to play a game where they could lose because that might look bad. And so it made it very, very hard for them to do any sort of effective wargaming. And so the best they could do was these kind of very loose, rules light, talk through the scenario type stuff. Yeah.
The infantry school used to have some really good war games.
Mm.
One was a version of Dun Kempf, but the one that I really liked, they called it it took place in the cat house, and they actually you sat in a decommissioned frame of a Huey with curtains blocking off the battlefield. You could ask the pilot to give you a pop-up, and they'd whip the curtain off and take a quick look at the battlefield, and they'd whip it back. And it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's cool.
But I was the S3 for it, and I think they got a little nonplussed when I called in airstrikes on the troops.
On your own
they
troops?
They stopped answering. I figured they're all dead anyway.
What had actually happened that they stopped answering?
They just didn't answer. They were just fucking with me.
Oh, shit.
But, well, no, because they were going to lose anyway. The Russians had, how to put it this way, nobody stopped the Russians. Almost nobody stopped the Russians at the river line we were defending in this particular game. I did stop them. But they were in among the troops. No answer.
Right.
Yeah, the troops are dead. Take out the Russians with them. DPICM, baby.
Wow. I maybe 10 years back, I played in a really good war game at Historicon, it was the Battle of Tarawa, using spearhead rules. And the way it was set up was I was the division commander for the U.S. forces, and I was situated away from the war game. All I had was a map showing where my units were supposed to be and what their objectives were, and I could give them orders. And I had a walkie-talkie to talk to the various players that were actually pushing the lead on the table. And they, in turn, had a map, and then they would call artillery to me, call it in what they would like, and then I would tell the referee where I wanted the artillery strikes to go. It was good fun. So so I get, guy calls in, he calls in target for his artillery fire. And so I tell the referee, all right, we want to bring in artillery fire on this. Next turn comes in, I hear my report phone like, we're getting heavy counter battery fire. Please double down, same location. So I'm like, all right. So I call the fire in again. This goes on, the next turn, the guy's like, we're getting wiped out over here. Where's our fire support? Finally, I figured out the guy is holding the map wrong, and he's calling in fire on his own troops this whole time. And so I've just been obliterating the American forces with artillery strikes. And yeah. So then there was an option. I could go in. I could actually go, if I put my miniature on the map, I could go land on the beach at Tarawa and sort of take direct control. So I'm like, all right, I have to do this. This is a disaster. My division, my commanders aren't doing what they're supposed to. So I rolled in the moment I hit the beach, sniper kills me, I'm out of the game. I was like,
That sounds like a fun game.
It was a fun game. It was a little too realistic, you know. It was a little too realistic there. Yeah.
The one at Fort Benning that was sort of based on Dunkempf, you know, and they had terrain boards that you could move around. It was very nicely done.
Yeah.
And you got every 2 companies, you had a captain or field grade commanding for you as the battalion commander. You didn't see the map, you know. You didn't see the battlefield. You had a map,
right?
Also, right. Well, I'm a first lieutenant, right, and both my company commanders were majors. The guys playing my company commanders were majors. I just chew them out heartlessly. They weren't majors for the game.
Right.
They were just shithead captain.
That was good fun.
Yeah, that didn't. That probably didn't be any, yeah, that probably didn't be any friends.
I feel like every story ends and this is why I didn't become a general.
No, there's a lot of it. The actual reason I was leaving my second company command, you know, and I'm looking at probable water walker OER, and I'm shooting the shit with the brigade commander in his office. And he's talking to you, you know, you should do this, and then you need to do this, and I can help you do this. And it hit me that he's trying to mentor me into stars. And I had a sudden blinding flash of the obvious. I said, sir, I don't want to be a general. And he's like, what? So I stood up and I went and I got, do I have one here? Yeah, but it's not real convenient. I went and I picked up his helmet from his LCE tree. And I pointed the brim towards him and I asked, sir, do you remember General Meyer, Chief of Staff of the Army? He says, like Shy Meyer? Sure, I remember. Okay. Sir Meyer was a reformer. And he had, I counted, I think, 37 different reforms, about half and half trivial and important. And I turned the helmet around and I pointed at the 2 little bits of glow in the dark tape on the back and said, sir, this is all that's left of General Meyer. This is the only thing he changed that remains. And he's only been gone about 4 years. So what the hell's the point of being a general when you can't possibly have a good and lasting effect? He was like, yeah, I guess you're right. So that's when I knew I didn't want to be a general. Now, mind you, I've been pissing people off for years, so I don't think it would have happened anyway. But that was when I really knew I didn't want to be a general, because it was pointless.
Right. Now, it feels like, though, you've used your opportunity, you've used your fiction writing as an opportunity to kind of convey some of your thoughts on training and organizing for war, sort of in a fictional context, right? Like if you look at the Carrera verse, there's a lot in the Carrera verse that, you know, how you could structure society, what sort of weapon should be the infantry's main weapon, how you should train troops, things like that. That it feels like,
yeah,
you know, you're speaking broader than just fiction in those.
I'll flatter myself and say it's an 8-volume one-stop shop course in the art of war.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything significant that I missed. I could be wrong, but I think I covered every branch, every factor, every functional area, every different kind of war, techniques, tactics, operations, strategy, and grand strategy. It's all in there, although it isn't always as obvious as that, but it's all in there.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, I think the parts that were apparent even to like a layman reader, you know, the focus on training and the high casualty rates that they sustain during the training relative to what we consider acceptable training casualty rates, which is 0. Yeah, that was interesting. So hang on, we got a question from Sig. Okay, so Sig says, I'm not familiar with your work. I'll check it out. What's your favorite mainstream military sci-fi universe? Starship Troopers, Battlestar Galactica, etc.
Okay, well, if we're saying Starship Troopers, we have to be talking the book, not the movie. Okay. And Battlestar Galactica, of course, is not a book, although I guess they may have done some.
They did some books. Yeah.
I like them both a good deal. The new Battlestar Galactica, not the old one, which was pretty cheesy.
Yeah.
The new Battlestar Galactica Galactica was nicely grim and dark.
Yeah, it was.
And I rather enjoyed that. But Starship Troopers is, well, I'll put it to you this way. When I wrote the Amazon Legion, I wrote it with Starship, typing with my right hand and Starship Troopers on my left. More or less literally.
Interesting. Yeah, I told you this before, Amazon Legion was the only one of your books I didn't finish. And it was
Because they were girls.
It was because of the casualty rate among the female characters. Yeah, and the injuries sustained, and it just made me unhappy. And when I first read it, I really thought you'd gone out of your way to amp up the mega violence. And then when I went back, I was like, nope, this is just the same level of violence that there's always in a Kratman novel. It just is making me feel bad because it's women, and that was like really that was my real takeaway to that book, was there's something in men that really doesn't like this, and it was interesting.
Yeah, and part of my purpose was for, this is what you're asking your girls to do.
Yep.
It's not going to change just because they're girls.
Yep. Which was, I think, an important point. What did you think about? Did you ever read John Steakley's Armor?
I did. It's in a bookcase here somewhere. I think there. Yeah. It didn't make a huge impression on me. It wasn't bad. I think I enjoyed it when I read it.
Yeah.
But, if you take the not pro-war but pro-infantry Starship Troopers, the rather anti-war, and not particularly well thought out, in my opinion, Forever War. Okay, those are two kind of important flanks. Steakley's Armor just doesn't really, it doesn't do anything all that important. I seem to recall the main character is just some king trying to hide out from his duty.
Yeah.
That's a vague recollection.
Yeah.
I haven't read it in, Jesus, probably 40 years.
Yeah.
I never throw books away. So, I enjoyed it. I thought it was okay, but it didn't really move me any.
For lack of that kind of philosophical statement on what the war is about.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about Hammer Slammers? That's David Drake.
Yeah. Well, Hammer Slammers was David's time in 11th ACR.
Right.
Expanded, extrapolated, but basically it's 11th ACR.
Yeah.
They're okay, but I was an enlisted man and David was an enlisted man, but we came away with two very different sort of attitudes to the whole thing. Which is why, although my things are at least as violent as anything he wrote, with the possible exception of Redliners, they're not as cynical.
Right.
So, I can read Hammer Slammers. They're okay, but I don't really love them.
Yeah. Your books are interesting because the most how to put it. So most fiction, you really have two ways that are written. So there is the sort of story where they really downplay the horror of war and they just focus on how, exciting adventure stories, Star Warsy type stuff. And that's really fun. And, there's nobody's having really horrible things happen to them except for sort of nameless NPCs that we don't care about. And then there's the books that actually give you really realistic takes on warfare, but they always make sure to also offer that up in an omelet with a healthy dose of either anti-war politics or really dark cynicism.
Yeah, I don't think I've done either of those.
Yeah, and yours are kind of a different because they're they're definitely like it's good that war is hell because otherwise, we'd be too fond of it kind of a vibe, right? Like definitely showing the terrible side of war, but also showing that there are men who love war, and that there are men who find glory in war, and that there's an art to it, and things like that. And it's interesting. It's an unusual point of view, I think, in the 21st century.
Maybe unique. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's rare, right? Like you see it, you definitely see it in ancient writing. You see it in medieval writing. You see it a little bit in Younger writing Storm of Steel.
Oh, Ernst Jünger, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, Ernst
I've
Younger.
got
Yeah,
that around here somewhere too.
yeah, you see it in that. And then you basically just after World War One, and especially after World War Two, and especially after Vietnam, it is gone. Like that is gone. So,
Yeah, there's Storm of Steel was interesting. Well, Younger was an interesting character too.
yeah,
Apparently, good soldier, pretty gay. You know,
gay,
I think he
really?
was married. Yeah, he was.
Hmm.
I think he was. I believe he was. I think he was married for a while, but it was sort of maybe pro forma.
Hmm.
And I believe toward later in his life, he was pretty gay.
Huh. Didn't know that. That's,
Well,
you know.
Theban Sacred Band. They've always been there, unlike women.
Right, right. So, let's see. North says, "I always have a voice screaming at me at women in war." Yeah. So, yep, yep.
Um, yeah, there's so much pure bullshit in
Hmm.
print about women in war. Um, just absolute, total, complete, thoughtless nonsense. If you want a fairly realistic take, the Amazon Legion will give you a pretty realistic take.
Right. And you
I
told
think
me
it's doable.
it was
Hmm?
based on a nonfiction. You said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Originally, I wrote it as nonfiction, spent a ridiculous amount of money on books, and a ridiculous amount of time in law school. Probably cost me a quarter of a grade point um, writing it. As a matter of fact, before anybody springs for the novel, you can go look on Bain.com for the Amazon's Right Breast, which is the original nonfiction book, sort of compressed down into
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe 10,000 words worth of nonfiction.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it'd be a worthwhile read. I think for anyone who's interested in doing that realistically. We have a lot of unrealistic women warriors in my role playing games, for instance, but nothing like what you wrote about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was really pretty upfront and honest.
Yeah. Oh,
And I think it could be done my way and no other.
your way and no other. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I won't spoil the book because there is a lot of interesting stuff in there and how they organize the women, how they train them. So I won't spoil that, but it's worth reading. So would you say is Carrera verse? Would you say that's your main? Uh, uh, that's been the main focus of your writing in terms of laying out your philosophy of war. If someone wanted to read it and be like, where do I go to understand the Kratman worldview?
Well, yeah, probably. Or go to Understand War, because again, it's pretty good 8 volume one-stop shop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, with the Countdown series, I was mostly having fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I put a lot of thought and effort into it too, but I was mostly having fun. I wasn't trying to teach anything. The occasional point, like if someone grabs some of your people hostage, grab some
Right.
of theirs.
Right.
The Caliphate, that's a free download if anybody wants it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the things I put in that, I couldn't write for weeks after
Right.
like some of the shit I did to Petra, I just had to stop writing for 2 or 3
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah. I read that one. That was a brutal one. Although, I mean, also in some ways very prescient because a lot of people are now talking about how that might actually be the future of Europe. So I think at the
I
time
don't know that Europe can avoid it at this
right.
point in time.
Yeah.
They,
Yeah,
they,
I have a couple of friends who are firmly convinced that Eurabia is sort of the future that is going to occur in Europe, and it will not really be avoidable. So, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. But you were talking about that. I mean, this was 15 years ago. You
Probably
wrote
around.
Caliphate. Yeah, yeah, long, long,
Actually,
long,
I
long.
think I had a contract to write Caliphate, and I just never signed it, and I just put it aside. And then my basement flooded, and the contract
Uh,
disappeared somewhere. So, I finally had cleared cleared the deck, and I was ready to write Caliphate, and I told Tony to send me another contract. Well, she did, and she updated all of the dates and everything, so it was all very doable. And then I was looking on the Simon and Schuster site, and they had Caliphate being released a couple of months after I was due to turn in the first draft.
oh,
I wrote it in 6 weeks.
wow, wow, that's impressive. Now, so it's interesting because in Carrera, the the ersatz Islamic forces in the science fiction world of Terra Nova sort of open the series as the villains. But as the series progresses, it really isn't about them at all, which I thought was interesting, right? Like if you just read if I had just read book 1 and predicted where you were going to go with it, it would have been like, oh, this is going to be sort of like uh, sci-fi war on terror, right? And blah blah blah. And actually, you're like, nope, we won that war, and we just kind of move on to the bigger threat. It's kind of an interesting way you develop that.
Yeah, the destruction of the European Union equivalent, the
Right.
Tauran Union,
Yep.
and waging war on Old Earth.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Um, and so and you end up realizing that in a sense the initial stages of the book, it was really just sort of fighting these proxies that are being manipulated into battle um, on behalf of sort of these old Earth. Nowadays we would call them like global reset WF types, I guess. So you call them something in the book as like cosmopolitan or something.
Cosmopolitan progressives,
Yes, yes,
which is a riff off of transnational progressives or transies.
right. That's right. That's what it is. Yeah, yeah. So they turn out to be the main villains of the series, which is interesting. Although you portray them rather sympathetically, to be fair. Like they're and you portray the Carrera's Arab enemies for the most parts relatively sympathetically as well. Like we get in their heads, and they're not like cardboard cutouts.
No,
Uh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I should say you're sympathetic to the ones that are actually good soldiers. The ones that are not good soldiers, you're not very sympathetic to. You get in their
well,
heads, but
Carrera
yeah.
is not sympathetic to them at all.
No, Carrera is not, but you as the writer are.
Yeah,
Yeah, you as the writer are. Yeah,
Carrera kind of got pushed a little bit too far, so
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
he's not fully sane.
No, no, that's right. But I mean, I think that it's similar to Batman in the sense that you have to have your protagonist be a little bit crazy in order to have the impulse to drive him to do all these things to show what's the limits of the possible.
To wage a private world war,
Yeah,
interstellar war, eventually. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like sane people don't do that, right? Um, Maybe they should. Maybe we'd be better off if we all had a little more Carrera in us.
Well, maybe. I mean, I, I think I was pretty obvious that although it was the war on terror was not the main thrust of the book
Right.
of the series, it should have been done my way.
Right, right. No, I mean that's definitely the one gets the sense that you're kind of hoping that future army leaders will keep the Carrera series under their pillow the way Alexander kept the Iliad under his pillow. Um,
I don't know that will or could ever happen. I mean, they know about me. I'm required reading in some segments of the special operations community.
oh, that's
But
interesting. Yeah.
well, I didn't know that. My son-in-law, ex-son-in-law, but we're still fairly tight. He's SF. He just retired a little while ago, and he was at a course, I think on calling in air,
Hmm.
and he happened to notice a copy of Carnifex under this Air Force type's
Right.
arm, and he's like, "What do you think of the book?" And the Air Force guy says, "Well, I haven't gotten very far into it yet, but it's required reading in my squadron."
Oh, wow.
And so my son was like, "Interesting enough."
Oh, wow. Huh, that's cool though. That's really cool. Carnifex was a good one. Now, do you plan to do more books in the series, or are you done with the Carrera verse?
I don't know if I live long enough and I get a little bored with the Romanov verse. I could conceivably squeeze out 3 volumes of Hamilcar Carrera's Liberation of Old Earth.
Right, right,
Um, it wouldn't have a lot to do with the previous, except he'd be maybe the only character who transferred over, or maybe a
right.
couple of minor ones, and
Yeah,
an aunt who was a hell of a girl.
yeah. Now, that's I think the third time you've referenced dying. Like, um, do you know something I don't about the possibility of a global annihilating war or something? Like, do I need to be overly
No,
or are you just like
no, I
concerned, or
wouldn't.
are we just talking like health concerns?
Neither. I'm 68.
68, plenty of time.
Well, yeah, but here's the deal, right? Um, Besides the dish in my spine
Hmm.
and the bulging discs and the herniated discs, I've got diabetes. I've had at least one silent, they think more than one silent heart attack, and I've got 100% blockage in my right coronary artery. So,
Ooh,
how long am I going to live?
yeah. I'm sorry to hear that. I did not realize you were dealing with so many health challenges, Tom. That's rough.
The 100% blockage is less impressive than it sounds. It was slow, so all the other veins and arteries expanded to take up the slack. I've actually got
Right.
something called an ejection fraction. It's a measure of the heart's efficiency as a pump,
Yeah.
and I'm about 97% of an Olympic quality heart, despite the blockage.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's the payoff from years of fitness. I just heard Mike Rowe's mother published a bestseller at 92. Well, there we go.
Yeah,
What took?
good for her. I just can't guarantee that I'll be around to do that. I might be.
Yeah. I just want to
And if
know
I'm around,
what took her so long. You know.
yeah, well, frankly, she needed her son to be famous enough to turn it into a bestseller.
Yeah. No. Of
That's just
course.
how that crap works.
That's how that works for sure.
I mean, if I live another 24 years and I've got the bulk of my faculties for that 24 years, yeah, I'll finish the Romanov verse. Yeah, I'll do Hamilcar's Liberation of Old Earth. Sure. I just
Now, if
can't
you
guarantee it.
looking back on Carrera, is there anything you would change from the series?
No,
No.
no.
That's a good feeling, man. I don't think I could say that of anything I've ever written. I'm like, oh my god, let me give you my list of things I would change.
Oh, I
That's
mean,
a
well, the occasional typo, not all of which were my fault.
right.
The editorial process, the copy editing process, tends to put typos in there.
It
So you
does.
have
It
to
does. I have the same problem. Yeah.
you have to be really careful. Go through it again, and you know, I don't write to an outline, although there is a theory that I write to the most thorough outlines possible. But I really just start a book with a beginning point, an end point, a few waypoints along the way, and I write that, and then I go back and I rewrite it and I fill in, and then I go back and 27 times in one case that I actually counted. A desert called
Wow.
Peace and Carnifex, or 27 times I went through
Wow.
and just completely redid it, starting
Wow.
at very small. Well, at some point in time, between attempt 1 and attempt 27, there's an outline there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I write my RPGs the same way, right? Like I do them iteratively. I write, I go back through, I iterate, and and my Discord community suffers through my releases because I release my drafts to them as we go. And so they're like, "Oh, okay, version 26. What's changed in version 26? Let's.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it's really weird though because I write absolutely perfect, flawless text that has no typos and no errors ever, and yet there's always typos in my books when they get published. I don't understand how it happens.
I have plenty of typos, but that's you know, in any given book, I might make 100 typos.
Yeah.
But I'll catch almost all of those. But still, other ones will crop up. In one case, I remember they eliminated a comma. I don't remember what book it was, but the copy editors eliminated the comma, which changed the meaning of a sentence, which changed the meaning of a paragraph, which ruined the entire book.
Oh,
And I
oh,
know I caught it in time.
but still,
Have I
yeah,
caught all of them that might have done that? I don't know. I hope
yeah,
so.
yeah. So that reminds me, you were telling me earlier about writer's block, how your friend, one of your friends in the author community that writes military sci-fi has been experiencing a lot of writer's block. And you said you had a story you wanted to tell me about how you overcame writer's block.
Okay. I was
So,
stationed in Germany, and I had taken over 6 people's jobs and could do them all to perfection in 2 to 3 hours a day. An hour of which was reading the daily intel summary. Just anyway, but I was stuck. I hadn't written anything for about 6 weeks, I think, and I normally cranked out, pretty reliable 2 to 3,000 words a day.
even when you
So
were
we had a long
when you were full-time active duty, you were still cranking out 2,000 words a day.
2 to 3, yeah.
Wow.
I don't do that anymore. I've slowed down, but at that time I did.
Wow.
And I had writer's block, and we had a long weekend, 4-day, I think it was, 96 hour. So I bought 5 liters of whiskey. If memory serves, it was a liter of Jameson's, a liter of Bushmills, and then 3 liters of Glenlivet. I got a bucket of ice, sat it down the bucket of ice, sat down the 5 bottles of booze, sat down my laptop, sat down me with a glass, put in some ice, poured, and started drinking. I came to 4 days later, in time to go in for work, not hungover because I was in training, and I'd written 27,000 words.
Wow.
And you would think, oh, they must have really sucked, those 20. No, they didn't.
Yeah.
No more typos than normal, and it all flowed very nicely. It was,
Yeah.
I don't drink anymore, so I can't fall back in that. But
So does this mean we could, do you think we could actually get another Game of Thrones novel if we sent a sufficient amount of alcohol to George R. Martin?
I don't know. Does he drink at all?
I don't know. Does he
Yeah.
write it all?
Well, that's a good point, but probably not. It was probably, how you can drink, how you can speak a foreign language better after a few.
Yeah.
It's probably more related to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think George R. R. Martin probably just didn't do what I can say. I knew before I typed the first word of A Desert Called Peace what was going to happen in Days of Burning, Days of Wrath.
Yeah.
I may not have written it down, but I knew everything that was important anyway that was going to happen, to include in the Amazon Legion, and
Yep.
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 So
yeah, I remember you telling me actually that 10, 15 years ago, because when you were telling me about your book Organizing for War, that you had already figured out the entire ending to the Carrera-verse series because you had to, because you knew the lessons you wanted to teach, more or less, as I recall the conversation.
yeah, I mean, I'm a pedantic SOB, and in order to get you to sit through through the lessons, I give you a pretty good story.
Right. Yeah. Lessons are better with mega violence. Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah, it's good stuff. There was another question I wanted to ask you, and I've forgotten what. Oh, it was your. I think the Grognards here would probably be really interested if you wanted to talk a little bit about your thoughts on organizing for war. I believe you called it the principles for organizing for war. I know you've got it published on Amazon as but there's general thoughts you've shared with me I thought were really interesting. I remember us talking about how weapon range of artillery could help identify at what level the artillery should properly be organized,
Sure.
things like that.
60 millimeter mortars go at company because their range is the closest to the company's range without company's area of influence without significantly exceeding that. Assuming you've got 2 platoons up. Machine guns belong a platoon because they're and dragons. We don't have dragons anymore, but javelins, I suppose now. Well, I think they put javelins at company these days, but then they'll parcel them out.
Right.
Yeah, that's one factor. Span of control is one factor. There are, I don't remember how many I came up with in that essay. It's not really a book; it's just an essay, and it's not in print. It's probably on Amazon. Let me see. Amazon.
Yeah, I remember you explaining that principle to me, and that was one of those fire came out of my ears moments, because you realize oh, of course it has to be that way. If you put the short range mortars under the control of regiment or brigade, then it does them no good to be at that level of control because they're not in range from the the headquarters zone. Won't be in range of the area of operations where they need to actually hit the enemy. And so then they just attach them out anyway, so you may as well attach them out. And likewise, you can't put ultra long range missiles in the hands of the platoon leaders because the platoon leaders are supposed to be focused on, the immediate effects within their area of operations. So it's like, oh, of course, it makes total sense. There's a logic to this. It's not arbitrary.
Well, the single overriding principle of organization in all of the United States Armed Forces is maintenance and expansion of the maximum feasible number of flag officer slots.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not. It's how you end up with more generals and admirals than we had in World War II.
Right.
More admirals than ships, as a matter of fact. Oof. More generals than battalions.
Oof. Is that true? We have more generals than battalions?
I believe we do, yeah.
Yeah, that's
if not, it's
either.
very close.
Wow. Well, I mean, that segues. We have to talk about this now then. So we're going into...
Yeah, I've got to tell you, the essay Bain did not make that essay free. It's like $2.99.
Okay. But it's on Amazon.
Yeah, it is on Amazon, yeah. The title is, for anybody who wants to get it, Principles of Organization for War and Organizing for War in the Carrera-verse. And what that is I give the principles and I give an analysis of the principles, and then I use the Carrera-verse to explain
that's cool.
what they look like in practice.
Yeah. That's awesome. We actually, so one of our players who just chimed in here is North Scorpion. So he is currently fleshing out the Dwarven military in the world of the Arn Empire, which is our campaign game world. And he's trying to figure out Dwarven military doctrine for the use of steampunk automatons. So he's going to go read your book now.
Well, do the dwarfs use axes or pikes or swords or spears? Or yes?
So the way the dwarfs fight is they have a main force of spear and shield, which is heavily armored, and then they have more mobile troops that are lighter armor with axe and shield, and then they have mule-mounted crossbow for mountain patrols.
I see. You might want to look at the Zulus.
Okay.
Because it sounds like a heavier armed, shorter version of the Zulu.
Interesting. Yeah, could be. Yeah. All right, North, check that out. Zulus. You've got your instructions. Let's see.
Go watch Shaka Zulu. It'll cover it pretty well. With a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, so we're going to 2025. The war drums around the world are beating. It seems like everybody's in a big tizzy about the possibility of World War III. So, 5, 4, whatever war. Well, wait.
World War III was a Cold War. We won it.
And
World War IV was the war against radical Islam, and World War V is coming. And yeah, I think there are currently 44 4-stars. That sounds right, but there's a whole bunch of 3s, 2s, and 1s.
Yeah. So, are we going to win World War V?
What everybody is thinking of as World War V, probably us against the Chinese in the Pacific, or some kind of a nuclear exchange with Russia. I don't think Russia's insane enough to start a nuclear exchange, and I don't think they can rely on their ICBMs well enough, or their nukes. Their nukes aren't like ours. They're not suitable for long-term maintenance. China, I think the Chinese are too sane to want to fight us. But I am concerned, I mentioned it before we started, I am concerned that Xi and the party may have become captives of their own propaganda.
Yeah.
To where they have to act in certain ways because the people expect it, because they've been fascistically. China's not communist, it's fascist.
Right.
It's been fascistically manipulated into demanding it.
Yeah.
The other thing is that doesn't mean we may not fight with the Chinese, but I think it's 6 times now the Chinese have done something that they've used their military to send a message. They did it to us in Korea. They did it, I think, twice to the Russians, and they've done it 3 times to India. And what they do is they go in and they beat you up a little bit, and then they say, let's sit down and talk before this stuff gets too serious. And it worked with everybody but us, because we do not take the loss of our people, spilling of our blood, or humiliation on the battlefield very well. I think, I don't know, Bradford, I don't know if we know that about the PLA. They are not as high quality human material as they were 40 or 50 years ago, but they're still pretty high quality human material that is probably somewhat undertrained. But let's not forget, they kicked our asses in Korea. And there are probably enough of them that are high enough quality that they could still damage us. But the Chinese don't understand that if they did that, we're going to make them pay, a terrible price. Because they don't understand it, they might try it. But I think if they can avoid being captives of their own propaganda, I think they're too conservative and too smart to want to get involved in a general war with us.
Well, what about those who say that the U.S. industry is too hollowed out at this point to have a general war with China? That we just industrially
at this particular micro instant, that may very well be true. Although maybe we can still. How to put this? We're the people who looked at an empty field in Warren, Michigan in 1941, and in 1942 had a factory capable of turning out 1,000 of the best tanks in the world at that time a month.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's. Yeah, we could, get our dicks handed to us for 4 months, 6 months, but when we return, our vengeance would be horrible to behold. In addition to which, depending on how much faith you want to put in Peter Zeihan, and I put some faith in him. There are areas where he doesn't seem to understand me, but he insists that industry is coming back. I believe industry is coming back because we've got the only secure and adequate energy supplies on the face of the planet. Now that Trump's back in office, we do anyway. So, in 4 or 5 years, we're probably untouchable.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing to think, because if we can do that math, China can do that math. And so then that says, if they do that math and they also look at their declining demographics of young men and things like that, that says if they want to have a war with us, now's the time, right? Don't wait 5 years.
Except to be economic ruin for them now.
Right.
So like I said, I could see a war by miscalculation. I could see a war by escalation of a minor incident. But a deliberate, conscious attempt to get into a war with us, nah.
Gosh, this is like a white pill from you. I feel so white pilled.
Is that a good thing or a bad one?
That's a good thing. A white pill means you feel hopeful, right? The black pill means you feel hopeless. The blue pill is you're a normie who just, is looking at the matrix, and then the red pill is you see the truth. And then generally the red pill can either lead you to white or black.
I thought the blue pill meant you were impotent.
Could be. Could be. Yeah. Let's see. So hang on, we got some comments. All right. So we got Castellan's Keep says, I think China and America are both looking to cause a collapse and civil instability in the other. Don't have to win a stand-up war if rival country removes themselves from global play with civil war. Well, that could never happen here.
Oh no, I think if you look on Substack, I've got 2 Substacks. One is a bunch of old columns, and the other one is the care and feeding of your right-wing death squad that I'm writing with a Brit.
We won't. Let's not talk about that on YouTube, so I don't get demonetized.
Okay, well, it's there, and it's not about. It's really a warning to the left. You guys are courting some things you really aren't equipped to deal with, and here's what they are.
Grumpy Wizard says, we don't have the trained workforce anymore. There aren't
We
enough
didn't have the
welders to
welders in
build a small number of ships
1941
and
either.
tanks we are attempting to build now. Did we not? I thought we did. I thought we had a pretty skilled workforce in 1941.
We were just coming out of the Depression. We
Uh-huh.
had started, I should say, really 1939.
Yeah.
But we had 12 years of so little work and so little building that I
Right.
don't think we could say we had a well-trained workforce. But we, specialized a good deal and we trained them well
Right.
enough.
Right.
And we can have as many workers as we want, uniquely in the world.
By opening our borders, you mean?
Yeah, we can have as many as we want. We need to have better control of them than we have.
Right.
But I'm not too worried about that. I'm more concerned about infantry, except we could probably have as much infantry as we want too, the same way.
Right. Sort of the Roman method of you get citizenship if you fight kind of vibe. Or French Foreign Legion or whatever term we wish.
Right, although we probably couldn't keep them for 20 or 25 years before granting citizenship as the Romans did, but we could probably make it 6, maybe even 8.
I've always thought it was interesting that historically speaking, we live a lot longer now, right? Like the average life expectancy is 80 years old, let's say. Whereas in the Roman era, the average life expectancy, I think, once you got out of childhood, it was still maybe only 50, 40. And yet
something in that range.
Yeah, and yet they had a 20, 25-year military term to get citizenship, meaning, you would spend essentially your entire life and then get citizenship, and then you had a few years left. But they considered that a worthwhile deal, whereas nowadays we're hard pressed to get someone to do, say, 8 years to get citizenship, even though they'd have another 60 years to live. It's kind of interesting.
Well, your citizenship, it would with us too, presumably, would transfer to your kids.
Right.
Although marriage was forbidden for legionaries.
Yes.
Everybody knew they'd pick up common law wives.
Yeah.
And their kids would become, even those illegitimate kids would become citizens.
Right.
So they could be enlisted into the legions.
Right. So they ultimately ended up creating a warrior caste accidentally through this method, in a sense.
Well, we've done that also accidentally, but
yeah, accidentally.
I don't know any good way around it.
Yeah. All right. So Castellan's Keep says there were a lot of weld defects in World War II material that you don't hear about anymore because we won. I did not know that. That's really interesting.
I'm unsurprised. And it was probably true on all sides, particularly on the Russian side. And there'll be lots of weld defects in World War V. And we won't hear about that either as long as we win.
Right. It will get papered over under the arsenal of democracy, et cetera, et cetera. That's interesting. So I actually designed, I don't know if I told you this, Tom, I actually designed a simplistic World War III, I called it World War Next war game. Looking with basically the contestants or the combatants, belligerents were United States, Russia, China, India. Looked at a couple different scenarios, and I had a system that it was similar. It was similar at a very superficial level to like an Axis and Allies type game, but with one more layer of depth. And I played it with some of the Grey Brotherhood West Point guys. And what happened was the war begins. The war begins with China decides to take Taiwan. And as the game played out, China was able to take Taiwan. The United States moved to respond to with its aircraft carriers. The Chinese blew up some aircraft carriers with missile weapons. And the United States then fell back from missile range from China and said, okay, this is how you want to do it. And the United States player then spent the rest of the time building long-range stealth bombers, bombing the fuck out of China while hitting them constantly with financial and propaganda techniques until finally the Chinese government collapsed. And that was how the war ended, which that was fairly interesting. Wasn't what I expected, but it was interesting.
I don't think we're going to use, if Taiwan doesn't fall, we'll probably move carriers close enough for China to engage them. If Taiwan, however, holds out, we're just going to do distant blockade. No energy and no goods in or out. And China can't deal with that. They'll starve. they'll collapse.
Right.
So, I'm not the what is it? A DF-21, I think, is their ever so special, but never yet really tested anti-shipping missile.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't range to the Indian Ocean or the Persian
Right.
Gulf.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. They're still basically brown water restricted.
Right. The Chinese Navy is a series of targets for us.
And so you're
And that's
actually
even with our admiralty being really, really useless.
So you're actually pretty white-pilled about about basically like America's position overall. It seems like.
Well, if we can avoid that civil war I mentioned
Yeah.
or alluded to, we're looking at a 1,000-year golden age,
Interesting.
Where the rest of the world goes completely to crap, and we're sitting pretty.
I like sitting pretty. Let's see. 6-7 says, could always have a war closer to home, smaller transportation costs, get a Canadian bacon scenario, and send in Bud Boomer and the Omega Force. I mean,
okay,
absolutely.
Sort of. But if memory serves, that's a kind of the mouse that roared scenario, isn't it? Canadian
I believe
bacon?
that's when I believe it's a comedy where they invade Canada.
The to right the wrongs of 1812.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not sure we are going to avoid that civil war. Although with Trump's election, at least it can be pushed back, and maybe some larval stage human beings will grow into full-fledged human beings, and some old leftists will die, and we may get a sudden burst of sanity. It's possible.
I certainly hope so. Hope so.
Otherwise, we're looking at death squads.
I mean,
we're looking at the love child of 1980s Beirut and Argentina's Guerra Sucia.
Oh, so interesting. So you don't think you don't think a civil war in the U.S. would be like the kind of fighting they had in Yugoslavia then? You think more like Beirut and Argentina? Huh. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I'm worried because every time, so I don't know if you know this, I started a .com, right? Raised money for a .com, and literally as I launched that .com, we had the .com crash, right? So then I'm like, okay, I finally got my new company started, and I'm going to market, and I'm about to sign a deal to sell my company to Condé Nast. It's 2008, and we have the 2008 Great Recession. All right, goes to crap. So then 2019, I said, I'm starting an online clothing company. I'm gonna, do this whole, Shopify online store. Got the company, I've got the brand, I've got the business partner, I've got the designs. We get it launched. We have a wonderful, manufacturing partner in Wuhan, and COVID breaks out in Wuhan, and my company goes bankrupt. And I'm like, okay, this is not good, right? Literally every time I try and do some sort of major business enterprise, calamity occurs. And now I'm actually hitting 6 figures with my war game business, right? And the calamity is always related to whatever I'm trying to do. So I'm like, if I'm doing 6 figures now, finally in my war games and RPGs, I think it spells global doom, Tom. This is why I'm so black-pilled. I think it spells global doom.
Yes, you may be in fact the cause of all these problems.
I might be. I think I am. I think it's causal. It's the only conclusion. Yeah.
Well, I know where to send the people with pitchforks when.
Right when that's exactly what's going to happen. The shit's going to go down. People with pitchforks going to figure it out, and then it's going to be really bad. I'm not. Tell them about your Walmart thing in the Suez Canal. Also true. I was like, a couple of years later, I was like, oh, let me set up a new business. I'll be a Walmart seller, and the Suez Canal shut down.
You caused that.
It's my fault. It's true.
Clearly.
It's true. Yeah. All right. Well, look, we got 15 minutes left in our 90-minute stream, so let's open it up for some questions from folks. Let's see, Castellan. At least the rules for ACKS II are done before it pops off, so I can play ACKS in my foxhole in the Ohio front against the Chicagoland cannibal swarms. You know what? I hope that's right, man. I hope that is exactly what happens. I was joking. I should actually make a role-playing game about a U.S. Civil War so that people could then, like, play the game about anyway.
Well, I tried to give you a free membership, but I don't know how to do it. I can't make it happen.
Yeah, it's not a very good user interface. Substack is not. So, all right, let's see if we got any questions from the fans. I know North Scorpion, this is your chance, man. This is one of the world's leading experts on the art of war. So if you ever want to ask anything about the Dwarven art of war, now is your chance, North. Don't hold back, brother. We're counting on you to ask a question. So I'm bummed Sean didn't make it. I know he would have enjoyed chatting with you, Tom. He's a big fan. Sean Falcone.
No, I know you meant.
Yeah, he was telling us about his military experiences. During he was on a stream with me, I think 2 weeks ago, and he was telling us about some of his military experiences. Did he tell you about his second deployment to Afghanistan when they just ended up like putting him out in the middle of nowhere with an understrength unit and told him to use like local mercenaries?
I don't think he told me about that one. He told me about when he was a captain, but really he was just a first lieutenant. It never served a day on active duty as a captain. And he's telling me about taking over this company, regular company, I think it was. And it was wonderful because he did everything right. He didn't make any errors. He had his priorities perfectly. He knew just what to do, and he did it.
Yep. All right, Hank, we got some questions. Okay, North says, what area of war do you enjoy diving into the details the most? I enjoy the Pacific Front, given the absolutely insane acts of heroism. Favorite era of war?
This is a really sick thing to say, but I love all war.
I'm with you, man.
In all times and countries.
Looks like the same question from Sig. What's your favorite period of military history?
I don't have one. They all interest me deeply.
Thoughts on space-based satellite weaponry?
What kind? We can't station nukes up there. It's against the Outer Space Treaty. Everything else, there's a shocking lack of cover up there. So I'm not sure it really saves us from much of anything or does much for us. I was watching something on Rods from God not too long ago, which suggested it was a silly ass idea and wasn't going to work. So
I would think if they could get laser weaponry to work, that would be
what kind of laser? X-ray laser requires a nuke.
Let's see. Space. Okay, so here we go. Space-based dropping of tungsten
rods from God. I know Jerry Pornell was big into that. I don't think they need to be tungsten, actually. When you're talking about that kind of speed, the kinetic energy from a rock is sufficient. But I was watching something recently that indicated that they weren't going to work very well.
Interesting.
That there was a sort of a stability problem even with fins and guidance. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. That's not really, I'm not much for science for somebody who was allegedly writing science fiction.
All right, we got from Old King Cole. What lessons should the U.S. be learning from the Ukraine war? Are we learning?
Don't trust Ukrainian propaganda. Yes, we are.
Don't trust Ukrainian propaganda, and yes, we are. Well, what wrong lessons do you think we're learning? That's an interesting question.
Overwhelming efficacy of drones. I just saw something that Elon Musk put up, and I had to explain some facts of war. I'll never see it, but I put it there anyway to keep my conscience clear. I'll tell you the one thing that is not happening in the Ukraine war on either side. I don't really understand why they both, being successor states of the Soviet Union, should understand this deep in their bones. There's no mass there.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's using mass. Maybe a platoon charging a building to clear one floor, that, or you look at the combat footage, and there's a tank and a few APCs, and
Right.
that's it. We need to. The big lesson is mass still matters a great deal.
I mean, that is basically the opposite of what most of the pundits are saying on Substack, right? Like they're saying the age of mass is over. You can't have mass because fire will destroy you, et cetera, et
Mass
cetera.
includes counter battery mass. Mass includes aircraft going overhead.
Yeah.
But you don't get decision without mass. I thought I
Jonathan,
was.
he's true. It's true. Um, I read an interesting post on Substack the other day. This is my question for you, Tom. So the argument was that motorcycle infantry have been an overlooked arm since World War II, and believes that motorcycle infantry could make a comeback. Thoughts on that one?
Doesn't matter. The safety Nazis will kill anything resembling motorcycle infantry before it has a chance to be properly trained.
Okay, so actually, interesting enough, the author said it won't happen in the U.S. for that reason, but thought it could happen in other armies. And the writer's thought was, one, because of electric motorcycles, you get great range and they're quiet. So they have all the mobility of motorcycles, and they no longer give themselves away, and so really valuable for reconnaissance and fast strikes. And for urban warfare, you can hide a lot of them in a single garage, so you could have a whole platoon rapidly move out and then get back into cover very quickly after a strike.
I think built-up areas are the last place I'd want to use motorcycle infantry. Because you're just an ambush target,
right?
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Do I see them being effective? The Germans didn't use much. They're the only ones I think I can think of who really used motorcycle infantry. Although I seem to recall there was a folding jobby that maybe either the Brits or the Japanese or both had. But the Germans didn't do it because they thought it was good. The Germans did it because they couldn't produce enough trucks or half tracks.
Right.
So, this is one of those things that, well, okay, the 9th Infantry Division at one time was the experimental division.
Oh, this is the fast attack division experiment?
Yeah, the dune buggy.
Yeah.
And none of that crap really worked all that well.
Right. I understood they got wiped out by artillery, and all the testing was the problem they ran into. Yeah.
Well, notionally, I don't know that they ever actually fired any artillery at anybody, but
yeah, notionally. Yeah. All right, here we go. North has another question. What era would be the most enlightening to study for mixed or variable amounts of mechanized air mass in irregular? Rhodesia being an example.
Rhodesia is a pretty good example of everything, to include armor, small arms, supplies, all aspects of logistics, and a double threat of both, well, actually a triple threat of political guerrillas and more or less conventional forces in what was it, Zambia and Mozambique, I think. Rhodesia is a good example of a lot of things. A friend of mine, well, acquaintance more than friend, I guess, we were captains together in the Guard when I was in law school. And he was an interesting character. He'd been a Marine. He was in on the Mayaguez thing. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was been on the Mayaguez fiasco. Then he got out and he went to South Africa as a reporter. He was a journalist in South Africa. Then he went to Rhodesia. And in Rhodesia, a friend of his was killed, so he enlisted. And he was a no-shit horse cavalryman in Gray's Scouts.
Wow.
Matter of fact, if you could find his DA professional photo, you'd find that the unit crest he was wearing was actually Gray's Scouts, not anything from the U.S. Army.
Wow.
Then he left Rhodesia in 1980, just before everything went completely to crap. Came back to the States, joined the Army, went to OCS. And like he's just about to graduate, and they dragged him in, and you wanted to know about this time in Rhodesia. Well, I didn't lie about it, and they let him get commissioned. And then he was on a grad out of his ranger school, class, and he pissed off so many people. He was career death,
Yeah.
and is really capable, competent officer. And he got out and he went in the Guard, where he commanded a company for like 4 years, which is, not bad.
Yeah. So Rhodesia. All right. We got another question from Old King Cole. How do you think this is a great one. How do you think the Ukraine war will end? How much longer do you think it will last?
Probably end in February. I think Trump, whatever he said, he's going to need at least a month to browbeat the Ukrainians and the Russians both. The Ukrainians are going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
They were always fated to lose, and all the propaganda that they whipped on us never changed that. And you can dig onto my Facebook page and go way back, and it's 2 years, 2.5 years at this point, I guess, and you'll see I always said they were going to lose.
Yeah.
The question is, how much are they going to lose? Are they going to have to cede the Crimea, Donbass, and Luhansk to Russia? Yes, they are. They would be lucky if that's all they have to do, because what Putin really wants, I think, is everything up to the Dnieper River.
Mm-hmm.
That gives him a defensible barrier, which is part of his rationale for engaging in the war at all. And at that point, in order to get the Ukrainians to cede that much, and I don't know, I mean, something like 52% of the Ukrainian people are willing to give up anywhere from some territory to half the country, maybe, which is what the Dnieper would mean, just to stop the war, because they're, all this bullshit about wildly diverging casualty rates. No. They're using the same equipment by and large, under leaders who were brought up in the Soviet Union and therefore use the same doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same kind of military and non-military cultures. Casualties are within 20% of each other.
Right. But so since one is much larger, then it's just unsustainable for the other. Yeah.
Yeah, the Ukrainians can't keep it up indefinitely. A possibly good solution for both of them is the Ukraine does give up everything to the Dnieper River, but then is allowed to join NATO, which Russia, without having the Ukraine as a dagger pointed into their vitals, might agree to, and with the barrier of the Dnieper in their hands, might also agree to.
Right.
I'm not going to say I think that's what's going to happen, but it might be a least worst solution for everybody.
Oh, that's interesting. I have not heard that. Proposed. So I'm going to publish this on Substack soon, but I had ChatGPT play the role of the special envoy of the United States to Russia, and I had another AI play the role of the special envoy of Russia to the United States, and I had them talk to each other until they negotiated a peace settlement, and it was pretty interesting. So, and that peace settlement ended up with Russia retaining all of the territory it's currently gained, and with Ukraine agreeing to a 20-year moratorium on not entering NATO. So
Russia won't agree to that.
They would not?
They try to think, no, they're not going to let, unless Ukraine is truly truncated and they acquire a defensible frontier, they're not, NATO is just off the table. It's only on the table if the Russians can have the Dnieper.
Huh. Interesting.
I think.
You think? Well, I guess we'll find out. We'll find out. So, all right, we got time for one last question if anybody has it. One last question. So 2 minutes left here. Let's see if anybody comes up with one. Yeah, my views are pretty similar to yours. I think it's going to end in a negotiated settlement where Russia will have gotten most of what it wanted, but we'll see what happens.
Surprised nobody asked me why it was such a fiasco at the beginning.
Why was it such a fiasco at the beginning?
It's funny you should ask that. After the Ukrainians folded so easily over the seizure of the Crimea and not performing really all that well against Donetsk and Luhansk, I think either the FSB or the GRU Ukrainian desk said they're going to roll over.
Right.
They're not even going to fight.
Right.
And that explains the lack of logistic preparation, because they were going to live off the supermarkets and keep the tracks rolling by reference to the petrol stations. And that also explains why the Russians were extremely restrictive on artillery and air the first couple of weeks of the war. They expected to get everything anyway. Why wreck something just so we'll have to rebuild it?
Right. Makes total sense. Yeah. Yeah. And so when they didn't crack like an egg, I mean, essentially it's the same version as the story we hear about, oh, well, the Germans figured they'd beat the Russians before winter, so they didn't have winter gear. I mean, same basic idea. So
yeah, they were really optimistic.
Yeah.
Really, really optimistic.
Yeah. Although I assume you've read Viktor Suvorov.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was really interesting, and we don't have time, unfortunately, to go into whether his theories are right or whatnot. One of the things I thought was really interesting is he said that the communists had infiltrated all of the factories in Germany that manufactured cold weather coolant, cold weather clothing, things like that. And with orders to notify Stalin if the German army ever placed a major order for those things, because that would be a sign that the Germans were preparing to invade Russia. And so he attributed part of the surprise of the Soviets was the fact that they were so confident that the Germans wouldn't invade Russia without making huge purchases in cold weather gear. Since they never made the huge purchases in cold weather gear, they didn't see it. I thought that was kind of a funny point.
It's plausible. I don't know if it's true, because he's capable of stretching the point.
Yeah, I don't know if it is
But,
either. Yeah. So, hey everyone, just got back from running ACKS II. Speaking of fiascos, the party decided to comb the Luzon east-west looking for the fetid pit with no explorer. See, this is a terrible error. Jonathan, you need to join their campaign and provide exploration services to them. And Samurai Knight says, we'll end on this question. Here we go. Do you think we'll see World War III anytime soon? Well, I think you said you think we already had it, but now we're on World War V. So do you think we'll see World War V anytime soon?
No. I don't think the Russians can count on their nuclear forces, and I think the Chinese are mostly too sane to want to fight us.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. It's a really white-pilled conversation. I feel really secure about our place in the world now.
What was that nuclear? What's that mushroom cloud?
Exactly. So awesome. Well, Tom, thanks so much for carving out time on a Monday evening to chat and to meet the Autark community here. And we'll have to have you back on maybe with some of the more Blackfield folks, and you guys can go at it and talk war. That could be a good stream.
Might be fun.
Yeah, could be really fun. Are you? We had John C. Wright on a couple weeks ago to talk about his new book, so that was fun as well. You know John, right? I think you guys. Yeah, you guys. Yeah, I'm bringing back all my old Every Joe columnists. I'm calling on them all to appear.
There were quite a few of us at one time.
Yeah, we had a great. That was so funny, right? Because like I very quietly assembled just like this massive think tank on that website, and they were like, "Wow, the traffic is so good on this site. How are you doing it?" Just like, don't ask, don't. So, anyway.
And then I think they got penny wise and pound foolish a bit. And
they did, and then then the whole company went bankrupt. The whole company went bankrupt and they shut down. So very sad.
Oh, we all punched out. So driven out. I punched out.
Yeah, you punched out, but a bunch of sites got shut. All right, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's great, and we'll be back on next Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern time, for another Axe to Grind. Tom, have a great night.
You too, gentlemen. Good evening. Ladies too, if there's any out there.
I don't think we have very many.